My name's Alan Moore. I write comics.
Remember the 5th of November.
I've been thinking lately about you and me,
You know, it's funny.
about how this is going to end, about who will end up killing who.
This reminds me of a joke.
The whores and politicians will look up and shout, "Save us!" And I'll look down and whisper, "No."
Hello and welcome to the Alan Moore Cast. I'm your host, Nathan Cabanis, and I'm excited to welcome you to this, our debut episode. We're kicking things off with Moore's famous trilogy of Green Lantern stories, and we have the perfect guest to join us and help break it all down. You know him from his work on characters such as The Flash, Superman, James Bond, Godzilla, and yes, Green Lantern, as well as creator-owned works such as Two Dead, Arca, Cryptocracy, and my personal favorite, Pinocchio Vampire Slayer. His debut novel Godfall was recently released in an all-new edition and is currently being developed as a TV series from director Ron Howard and Imagine TV. We are very excited to be joined by Van Jensen. Van, how's it going?
Hey, I am doing well. I'm so honored to be the first guest.
Appreciate you being my guinea pig, as it were. So to get things started, I'm curious if Alan Moore's top 10 was an influence on Godfall, because there's that one issue where an alien giant falls out of the sky and causes a traffic jam, and I was just wondering if that might have in any way been a kernel of inspiration.
Yeah, that's a great question. I had forgotten that was in top 10 until you said it. Because I probably read top 10, I don't know, maybe 10 years before I started working on Godfall, but I mean, subconsciously had to be in there.
So Godfall is definitely Alan Moore-esque in a lot of ways. What I love about it is the domestication or the normalization of this sort of reality-shattering event. The way that society just kind of carries on and goes back to some kind of normal in the wake of having a literal alien giant fall from the sky and land in the middle of Nebraska.
Yeah, well, his writing, I mean, undoubtedly has had a huge influence on me. I think it is exactly that. It's kind of the thing, regretfully, that I think so many writers have missed in the sort of lessons that they've learned. And, there was a generation of superhero comics that were sort of derivative of Alan Moore, I guess I would say, but it was all, the grim and gritty generation of superheroes. But that completely misses what I think is really the essential thing with Alan Moore, is that he has these insane concepts. I mean, the craziest, most creative concepts you can imagine. But he's always focused at the human level. It's just really, really emotionally driven. Very like we have our feet on the ground. We're with these characters in their lives. And I think that, viewing that as gritty is just this gross simplification of the really tricky and really smart work that he did.
Totally. I mean, it's kind of hard to not be influenced by Alan Moore. I feel like even if you've never read his work, you're still influenced by him in some way.
Yeah, I mean, the cultural impact of, the movies that have been made off of his work, the just the concepts that he instilled within superhero comics that then have carried on and have lasted with these different characters and franchises. And then also all of the stuff, like I said, that's derivative of him. I mean, we're seeing stuff that's inspired by Watchmen, inspired by V for Vendetta. The tone of it has really carried on. And I mean, you could definitely say one of the most influential creative minds of the past, certainly 20 to 30 years.
Which is why he now has an entire podcast devoted to him. A fact I'm sure he'll be delighted to find out.
Yeah, there's the one thing that about Alan Moore is that he's always delighted about everything and is never cranky about anything.
One of the things I want to do with each guest is to get their own personal history with Alan Moore. So I'm curious, how were you introduced to his work?
Yeah. I grew up in a really tiny town, technically a village. So it was 300 people. There was a grocery store that was called The Store, because, you weren't going to confuse it with the other store. So they had a rack of magazines, and the woman who ran the store, she found out that I like comic books, and she told me, "Oh, I can order comic books." So I had this deal with her where I would figure out, like, I have X dollars of allowance, or money I got from chores or whatever, and so she would order, I spent all of my money on comic books. But I had such little exposure to anything. So I was reading G.I. Joe. So this was like early to mid 90s. So G.I. Joe, Spider-Man, X-Men, a little bit of Batman. And, I knew that there was other stuff out there because there would be the house ads inside comic books, right? So that was the only exposure that I had. Like I think I started reading comics. Let's see, I was 4, and so this would have been like 86, 87. So I would have seen house ads for Watchmen, but it was like the most like foreign exotic thing. It could not have been farther away from me. So I never had exposure to any of that stuff. And then when I got to college, I had stopped reading comics, and I fell in with this group that were comics readers, but they had grown up in bigger towns, so they had more stuff. And so they asked me, like, "Oh, what do you read?" And I told them. They were like, "That's it?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, isn't that like that's all that exists, right?" As far as I knew. And they're like, "No, no, 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 no." And one of the first things they said is, "Oh, if you've grown up reading superhero comics, you have to read Watchmen." And I think that was like Amazon was like a brand new thing that only sold books. And I think that was how I ordered Watchmen. This would have been like 2000. And so I ordered Watchmen, and it's kind of like if you grow up watching like 80s cartoons, and then as a preteen you watch Akira, right? And it's like, oh shit, there's this complete other level of stuff. And that's how it was with Watchmen. I mean, I read it and reread it and reread it and reread it. I mean, I probably read it like 5 times back to back to back to back, just studying it. And I had no idea who Alan Moore was. Had not heard the name to that point. I was so clueless about it. And it just, yeah, man, it just blew my ears back. And at that point, like, anytime that I ever find an author that I really love, I'm like, I've got to read everything now. And so that was really the starter for me. And I guess that was kind of like just at the time that the ABC stuff was starting to come. So it was this cool thing where I was like, able to go back to his old stuff and read his contemporary stuff all at the same time.
Yeah, I read Watchmen around the same time, in the year 2000. But it was one of those things where I had heard about him for years before that because I read Wizard Magazine and all the Les Daniels history books. So I already had this big myth built up in my head about Moore and about Watchmen, but fortunately, the work lived up to all that hype.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel really fortunate that I went into it so blind. I had no idea what it was about. I had no concept of anything. And I was able to see, and credit to my friends for not like building it up for me. It was just like, hey, read this. But real quickly I saw the parallels with like, the old DC characters, the Blue Beetle, connection, all of that. so yeah, it was just, I think it was just the combination of technical expertise and just real craft of character building, character writing, that was what did it for me. And then of course, the great mystery at the heart of it.
So, when I reached out to you initially, you picked the shorts that Alan Moore wrote as backups for the Green Lantern titles. So we'll get into each one individually, but just to start off, what was it that made you pick these stories in particular?
Well, I think the obvious choice, I mean, there's so many obvious choices with Alan Moore, the huge ones. I mean, probably Watchmen and V for Vendetta are right up at the top of the list. Because I wrote Green Lantern and because I know what it's like working with DC Comics and working with these existing franchises and how hard it is to kind of make anything meaningful happen. I really had a lens on that side of it, but then also, the stuff as small of a footprint as he had, or as little time as he spent in that sandbox, he made these really incredibly huge impacts. And so I think that's kind of why those stories have really lived with me. Is it's just this massive bang for the buck of when he came in, it was never playing safe. It was like backup stories, but he brought his A game to backup stories, and I think that's if you want to know why he's the greatest comic book writer of all time, that's the answer.
Yeah, they're really impressive. I mean, 2 of them are 6 pages. I think Tygers is 12, but he's able to cram so much into each story. So let's tackle the stories one by one, starting with Mogo Doesn't Socialize, appearing in Green Lantern number 188 in February of 1985, with art by Dave Gibbons. So this story sees Green Lantern Tomar Ray recounting the tale of fellow Corps member Mogo to young recruit Arisia, which sees feared intergalactic warrior Bolfunga the Unrelenting travel to a distant planet to hunt down one of the most feared members of the Green Lantern Corps, and he winds up being in for a big surprise. So this is kind of the perfect short story, right? It feels like a great future shock that could have been in 2000 AD, which, given the pedigree, shouldn't be all that surprising. It's just a classic science fiction story with a great twist at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this story is really in the tradition of a Wally Wood classic science fiction story. It's just, and it really harkens back to when Green Lantern first appeared, and the Silver Age iteration of Green Lantern first appeared. It really was in the vein and very similar to the sci-fi books. It was about traveling to other planets, and it happened that there's the rings and the powers and there's that, but it really was akin to Adam Strange or weird science. And so just this perfect setup of the toughest bounty hunter there is, going to the planet, being so hyped up, ready to fight, looking for a fight, and then the final revelation that the Green Lantern is the planet itself, that the planet is alive. Just perfectly executed, super funny, and then Mogo has had just this incredibly long life as a character, right? Mogo, is a massive part of the mythos of Green Lantern. So when I was writing Green Lantern Corps, we did an event where Oa, the home planet of the Lanterns, is detonated. Uh, and so then we put the Green Lantern Corps on Mogo, and I was working with Rob Meditti on this crossover. And the thing I said is like, when we first took over the books, we were like, why aren't they based on Mogo? Clearly, they should be on, like, Mogo's like a living aircraft carrier. I mean, they can go wherever they want. They can come en masse. Like, obviously, this is the right thing. This is the cool thing. And it was just, it was all inspired out of Alan Moore's creation. I wanted, and the editors would never let me go for it, but I wanted to write an issue that was all told from Mogo's perspective. And so the idea is that Mogo is everywhere, right? So you would have all of these stories going, like 9 different stories going of different places on the planet where different things are happening, and then they kind of intersect. Like, Mogo is like observing little bits of things, and in his own way, can interact or like change the course of events or shift things in just a way, but it's like really subtle. And so no one sees that Mogo is doing all of these things. But they were like, yeah, it's way, way too weird. But I still I wish that I had gotten to do it. But the thing is, I think that I thought about that kind of a story. I conceptualized that kind of a story because that's how Alan Moore inspires you. Because that's the way that his brain works. He's always like, it's not just what's this crazy idea that I can have, but how do I do that in something that is, one, really cleanly told story, and two, is complex and interesting and like challenges me as a writer.
I'm surprised they didn't go for that, because Mogo's been a pretty major character in most all the Green Lantern books ever since. And a story told from his perspective feels like a given.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, when I was at DC, it was the New 52 era, and I mean, I'll just say, like, not the greatest of heights. We got to do cool stuff, but there were a lot of limitations on us.
Understood. We also have to talk about Dave Gibbons. It's funny. I don't think I fully appreciated Gibbons until I was older. I mean, I could always tell he was a good artist, but he didn't quite have the flash of people like George Perez or Frank Miller. But looking at this story now, it just shows he's an incredible draftsman, an incredible storyteller. He's got this amazing sense of design. I mean, I think he's simply just one of the all-around best.
Yeah, I think that there's something with his art where it's almost like the more fantastical the thing is that he is drawing, the less that his art shines. If that makes sense. Like, I think the more grounded stuff that he does, I've got the story open in front of me. The best panel in the whole story is Bolfunga, like, tight on his eyes as he realizes, like, he's looking at aerial photos and he realizes what Mogo is. And it's just, all you see are his eyes, and they're wide, and there's a hard shadow on it. And there's another little one of the trainee, like, tight on her face as she has the moment of shock, of realization. Yeah, I think that, his art is great, but that very human stuff is just where he shines. I mean, there's a really fun little bit. Like, Bolfunga's ship has a chain on the back with severed heads dangling from it. There's a lot of great stuff in there.
Something I'm sure Moore described in his scripts in exacting detail. But yeah, that's one of the things about Moore is that he really writes to his artist's strengths.
Yeah, there's a famous thing with him that he has is kind of a form letter that he sends to any artist that he's ever going to collaborate with. And it's all these questions, and it's basically he really wants to get to know the artists and their preferences and what they love to draw, what they hate to draw, what they wish that they'd always gotten a chance to draw, even just like the style of collaboration. And I think he really gets something that it took me a while to figure out. I think when I first came into comics, I sort of cluelessly thought that I was like writing instruction manuals, which like, no, if you say that to an artist, that's like the most offensive thing that you could possibly say. And I think so when I wrote Green Lantern, I was working with Bernard Chang, and Bernard did not like me. Even though like we had a successful run, I'm sure that he still doesn't like me. And I was so I never understood why he didn't like me. I was like, I like you. Why, what? But it was just like I had the wrong mindset about it. But for Alan Moore, he views writing as, as a comic book writer, you're writing a letter to the artist. Like this is the opening salvo of communication, right?
Right. Well, we should also mention that this was adapted into a short as a part of the Green Lantern Emerald Knights animated anthology film. I don't know if you ever saw that.
I have not. I haven't watched a lot of the DC animated stuff. How was that adaptation?
It's actually pretty good. It's surprisingly faithful. It was written by Dave Gibbons, interestingly enough. I mean, they added some stuff to it to pad out the story so that, it would fill 10 minutes or whatever. But it's definitely one of the more faithful adaptations of Moore's work out there. Also adapted into that film was our next story, Tygers, first appearing in Tales of the Green Lantern Corps Annual Number 2 from August of 1986. Also, when I made my debut into the world, interestingly enough, with art by Kevin O'Neill. So Tygers is very different from the other two. So here we learn of an early event in the life of Abin Sur, the Green Lantern who would later give Hal Jordan his ring as his dying act. While visiting the planet Yzmalt to attempt a rescue of a crashed spaceship, Abin Sur encounters Kull of the Five Inversions, who agrees to answer 3 questions and proceeds to tell him tales of horror and doom awaiting him and the entire Green Lantern Corps in the future. So this story is amazing. Also wild that this comes out in 1986, right when Moore is starting Watchmen, wrapping up Swamp Thing, only a couple months after whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. It's just an incredibly fertile time.
Yeah, I mean, like you can take the stuff that he did within that one calendar year, and that's an incredible career for for anyone else, right? I think, going from Mogo Doesn't Play Nice to Tygers, it's just this really clear demonstration of the range of Alan Moore. It's so tricky to try to define him or like put his writing in a box. And I think that this just demonstrates that even within Green Lantern, he goes from telling this very like Silver Age fun sci-fi story to was really like psychodrama with heavy horror, and and then also like this in its own way. I mean, all of the concepts that he created in this were still being used extensively by Jeff in his run, by us in our run. Yeah.
It's also this starting point for so much that comes later. So much of Jeff Johns' run starts here, which has been contentious for Moore himself, but it's like there's all these tantalizing ideas just lying there. So how could you not pick up the ball and run with it?
Yeah, I think another thing that he does really well is there's an open-endedness to his writing, and you kind of like, even with Mogo, all you get of Mogo is that this thing exists. Like then that's it. Like, why is there a living planet? How is there a living planet? How did it become a Green Lantern? You end and it's just begging questions, which I think is a hallmark of a great ending. One of the endings that I think of a lot in terms of kind of like the note that I want to hit is The Graduate, the movie. Which I know this is going to sound like a strange corollary, but The Graduate, you have these young characters who are sort of in and out of love, and the girl's getting married, and he runs and bangs on the glass, and they run away together, and they get on the bus, and they're driving away, and it's like, if it cuts right the second that they get on the bus, happy ending. But the shot lingers on them just long enough for the characters to have this look come over their faces of like, wait, what have we done? And then you cut it, right? So when you walk away from watching The Graduate, instead of being like, oh yay, they came together, or, happy ending, everything's great, you come away from it and you're thinking, oh damn, like what's gonna happen to them? And that keeps you thinking about them. And so Alan Moore, he always leaves this space of the unknown or the uncertainty, or, it's like with this one, it has the feel of like there's this massive thing, this massive horrific thing in the universe, but it's like we're seeing the part of the iceberg that's above water. And there's all the rest of it that's below the surface, and we never even see that. And so as a writer, that comes into the world of Green Lantern, like of course you're like, oh man, like I can go under the surface and like explore all of that.
Totally. And I mean, you can speak to this better, but comics writing and comics storytelling is all about narrative real estate, right? There's sequences like the whole fall of the Green Lantern Corps, this huge apocalyptic event, and it all takes place in a single page.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just incredible stuff.
This being by Kevin O'Neill, I believe this is the second time he worked with Alan Moore, and that's a collaboration that becomes very important on down the line. I mean, it felt like they were working almost exclusively with each other for most of the 21st century.
Yeah, and you could see right from the jump that they're a great fit for each other. I mean, I think that Alan is so just conscientious as a collaborator that I think he's going to be a good collaborator with anyone. But there's a sort of like weirdness and playfulness with Kevin O'Neill that I think it just does Alan's work a lot of service, and I would imagine brings brings a certain like frothy tone to it that otherwise could be, played too straight. This story could be a little bit much.
Yeah, he's got that knowingly over the top, but also tongue in cheek quality. I mean, you look at Nemesis the Warlock, Martial Law. I don't think those stories work near as well without O'Neill.
Yeah, exactly.
Another interesting thing about Kevin O'Neill, his entire style was deemed objectionable by the Comics Code. So DC submitted the story for approval and it got rejected. So they asked, well, what should we change? And they were told that the whole issue would have to be redrawn. So DC actually ran this issue without the Comics Code seal of approval.
Wow. It's good bit of trivia.
It's also interesting that Moore chooses Abin Sur as the star of this story. It does feel like he's looking for the places that haven't been thoroughly explored.
Yeah, Abensur, it's kind of like the ultimate comic book footnote, right? It's like if you really know Green Lantern comics, like you know who it was that passed Hal Jordan's ring, but otherwise, who cares? And exactly like you said, what Alan Moore did was take that mostly forgotten footnote of a character and turn his whole life into this tragic parable. So then, that just enriches the entire mythos because it changes the tenor of the exchange of that ring. It changes the tenor of the history of that ring. It changes the tenor of the pressure and essentially the prophetic future of Hal Jordan and the Corps as a whole. Retconning isn't the right word for it. It's like, going back, because old comics, especially Silver Age comics, like they move so fast and there's no space for nuance. It's like stuff just happens. And it's one of the things I love about old comics is, you'll have like a massive fight with 100 people that takes place in 2 panels. And then it's like on to the next crazy thing. But it doesn't leave space for like nuance or character development or a lot of emotion. And so, I think with this one, Alan Moore was going back to the source material and was sort of like, there's stuff between the panels. Like there's something richer and deeper here. And so it's almost like he like went back into the past and just sort of like, stuck his fingers in the gutter between the panels and pulled them aside and opened up space and was like, here, this is what sits here. And it does. It just like it changes the mythos forever.
Yeah, that's what Moore really built his career on, taking advantage of things that no one had ever really taken advantage of before. So we can also note the connection between William Blake, Alan Moore, and Green Lantern. I mean, Blake was one of the key influences on Moore, as you can tell by the title of this story. But Blake's poem, The Tiger, was a big influence on sci-fi writer Alfred Bester's The Star's My Destination, which actually opened with that poem and was called Tiger, Tiger when it was first published in the UK. Also, fun fact, Alfred Bester wrote the classic Green Lantern Oath. So I don't know. I think this Alan Moore guy was onto something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the William Blake thing is really strong. When you look at the body of Moore's work, and I think especially V for Vendetta, From Hell, he is exploring Blake's London, which is to say, and there was for anyone who wants to do a deep dive, there was a recent essay in Harper's Magazine about essentially the psychogeography of London that talks about Alan Moore and talks about William Blake, and it's London not as there's this building and then there's this building and there's this street, but the history and the people and the ghosts and the way that actions in the past echo and create emotional energy that then is held in a city and affects the future of the city. And that was, William Blake was writing about exactly that, essentially a century before.
Yeah, and you can see Blake's influence all over Moore when you really get into it. Well, let's get into the last story, In Blackest Night, from Tales of the Green Lantern Corps Annual Number 3 from April of 1987, with art by Bill Willingham, pre-Fables Bill Willingham at that. So this story sees Green Lantern Kat Matui recount her discovery of a new alien life form in a galaxy completely devoid of light. She then attempts to recruit them into the Green Lantern Corps, which poses the question, how do you explain the concept of a Green Lantern in a galaxy where light doesn't exist? So this is a fun one. I don't think it's quite as substantial as the other two, but it is leaning into that Silver Age whimsy again.
Yeah, yeah, it's actually I really love it. As much as it it's a simple kind of yarn. But I think it's playful, but it also it just makes the universe feel bigger and stranger, which I love. In that there's a patch of the universe where the very concept of the Green Lanterns doesn't even make sense. Is impossible to relate. But it shows, and I think particularly Kamatui's character, who would continue to be for all through Jeff Johns' run a really essential character. It shows the mission of the Green Lanterns to find a way to have a positive impact. That's kind of what I love about it. Is it's really just this little character story of her, of like being so determined to like we have a mission, we're doing good work, we need to find a way to do it even where it's impossible, and I'm gonna sort of like puzzle my way through it. And Rotlop Fan, the character that does not perceive color, it's kind of a silly character, sort of looks like a, I don't know, like space dolphin. It's there's nothing like grating about the character. It is just like a fun kind of silly character. One thing that we would do when I was at DC Comics is we would get paid to write extra issues where they just like go into a file where it's like, if the shit hits the fan and we like whatever happens, but we need some other story, like we just have these scripts on hand, get one drawn and fill the gap in the schedule. And so I got asked about can I write one of these issues? And I said, of course, because why not? But I wrote a whole issue around Rotlop Fan.
Has that ever been published?
Never was published, and I honestly, I should look back. I'm sure that I have it somewhere. I don't even really remember what it was about. I remember at the opening of it, I had Hal Jordan was like using his ring to, like, he had a record collection on Oa, and he was using his ring to make a record player so that he could play records. Yeah, he had to like go find Rotlop Fan, and yeah, can't remember what else.
Sounds cool. Yeah, I don't know how many times Rotlop Fan has shown up since this story, but I was looking through Grant Morrison's run in prep for this, and he does show up there.
Yeah. Yeah, there have been a handful of appearances. I think, I can't remember if, I know Rob Venditti and I, like each of us tried to work him in a little bit. Because I mean, it's honestly, it's like part of the fun of it is, there's a character that's shaped like a box. We decided that his name is Box, Boks. Like we're gonna have Box show up, but yeah, I don't think that this story is anything where you can like make any grand proclamations about Alan Moore or his work or his career through this story. But I would say again that one, you just look at it and it's like a throwaway story that he puts his all into. And then I believe it's the first usage of the phrase Blackest Night in Green Lantern. Like Jeff Johns' whole run really was centered around the phrase Blackest Night. using it for a title and kind of bringing it out as like a thematic element. I don't remember seeing it treated in that way before. It's just like forgotten part of the oath. So I don't know that Jeff drew anything from that, but I think that the oath kind of had been a bit, it was like you basically never saw the oath in the comics. And so to take the oath and turn it into like, okay, how do we draw from that? That was definitely something that I think came from Alan.
It makes for a cool title, definitely. One other thing I wanted to bring up, and this applies to all three of the stories, but they all make use of a narrative framing device, which I found very interesting. It's a really unique way to approach telling short-form stories in the comics medium. So yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, especially with regards to these being short pieces in and of themselves.
Yeah. So Alan Moore wrote a book on writing that's in the form of a comic book, and it's a very slender book, which I highly recommend it for anyone, whether you want to write comic books or anything else. He talks in that book about finding a way into a story, whatever story you're going to write. Like, you have to find an entry point. Sometimes that's a character, and sometimes it's a setting, and sometimes it's sort of like the big high concept of it all, and sometimes it's a framing mechanism. And comics particularly lend themselves to framing mechanisms. And I would say that is because, we think of comic books as this combination of art and story, but they are actually a combination of art and story and design. The very structure of the page is part of the storytelling, and that's design. The captions, the balloons, all of that. Those are design elements and design choices. And page flow, it's all design. And you look at the art of someone like Jesse Lonergan, who I've collaborated with in the past, extremely design forward artist who is always putting thought into how every little thing is framed. So I think the vast majority of people who make comics don't ever think about the design, or think very little about it, or it's just sort of, like they're following their instincts, but they're not proactively thinking about framing and design. And it is incredibly obvious with Alan Moore that he is thinking about every last aspect of everything. So he gets that framing devices exist. He is proactively thinking about them. He is looking, this is from his book. This is not me putting words in his mouth. He's looking for opportunities to do interesting structural things. And I think it's because he's so insanely smart that he wants to challenge himself. And this is me putting words in his mouth. I think that he was always looking for a way of like, how should I make my job harder? But also like, how can I make it more interesting? And I think you're exactly right. Each of these stories events exactly that. They do it in subtle ways. Whereas, of course, there's the famous issue of Watchmen that is a mirror of itself, right? In terms of panel layout and panel structure. But yeah, like, again, if I have one takeaway from all of this, these are pretty simple throwaway assignments. Like, when you work at a big comic book publisher, you get them. I've had a bunch over the years, and it's like, you're getting a little bit of money. It's literally space filler is the assignment. And so for Alan Moore, he took space filler and created stuff that is so iconic that, there are going to be elements of the stuff that he did in these three stories that show up in the Green Lantern TV show. I guarantee that there's inspiration from that. Three backup stories. 40 years ago. Jeez. It's insane. But that's because he just always put the work in. And that's what I like. The biggest thing that I take away from him is he's always trying to do something really interesting, really cool.
I don't think we can find a better capper than that. Well, Van, thank you so much for coming on. Before you go, anything you'd like to plug?
Yeah, so my first novel, Godfall, is out now. It'll be coming out this fall in paperback as well. And people can always check me out at vanjensen.com. I have a newsletter where I talk about writing and writing advice, different tips I've learned over my years. And yeah, I think that's it.
Extra special thanks to Van Jensen for agreeing to be the first guest on our debut episode. Please do check out Godfall, which is available now from all good and decent booksellers. If you're a fan of grounded sci-fi, murder mysteries, and rural noir, I don't think you'll be disappointed. Next week, we're tackling one of the big ones, and we've got a particularly exciting guest in store. We'll be talking Swamp Thing with Dan Waters, writer of titles like Nightwing, Batman Dark Patterns, and the recently released Mask. Swamp Thing is a legendary title in the Alan Moore canon, and perhaps the reason he became a comic superstar after bursting onto the scene in the early 80s. So this is a title we had to cover on the podcast as soon as possible, and I don't think you'll want to miss what Dan has to say about that legendary run. Until then, please do subscribe to the Alan Moore Cast on your podcast app of choice so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. I'll also be uploading episodes to YouTube on the dedicated Alan Moore Cast channel, so you can also check us out there if you're so inclined. While you're there, please also leave us a rating and drop a review. I have big plans for the show as we move forward, and we're just getting started, so I'd love to hear what you think. You can also find us online at Instagram at the Alan Morecast for updates and announcements regarding future episodes. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge Eric Vespi and the late great Scott Wampler of the Kingcast. That podcast, as you'd likely guess, was a huge influence on me in starting my own show, so thanks for the inspiration, fellas. And that should do it for this week. Special thanks to Michael Flug for the theme music, and thank you all so much for listening. Until next time, praise Glycon.